All right, so we can get started now. Uh, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to the seminar lecture today. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my former colleague, Dr. Srinivas Swain. He is currently an assistant professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at Indian Institute for Information Technology at Guwahati. He completed his MS in computer science and engineering from IIT Madras, which I can tell you is one of the topmost engineering institutes in India. He then completed his PhD from Monash University at Melbourne. His research interests are in the area of theoretical computer science and discrete mathematics. After completing his MS from IIT Madras and before going on for a PhD, he worked at Oracle India Private Limited in Bangalore for a few years. And this is where our association goes back to. I think we both joined Oracle around the same time. We were not in the same teams, but we were in the same building, fortunately. So every evening, pretty much, we'll walk upstairs to the cafeteria with our friends, teammates, colleagues to grab some drinks and also engage in several friendly matches of table tennis and pool. You know the best part? The best part is I won each one of those games. All right, just kidding. that last bit I told you about the best part, I winning every game, that did not happen. However, everything else that I have told you is true, my friends. And therefore, without further delay, I'm going to thank Dr. Swain for agreeing to give this talk today. Here it is 4:36 p.m., but where Dr. Swain is located, it is about 5 a.m. in the morning. So given this significant time difference, I'm very grateful that Dr. Swain has agreed for this talk. Dr. Swain, please take it away from here.
Thanks, Dr. Aditya. Um, so, good evening, everyone. Uh, so, this work actually is a work of my during my get started during my PhD, and it was a joint work with Professor Graham Farr, Paul Bonington, and Kerry Morgan. So, without much delay, let's get into the topic. So, in this talk, basically, I will give a little bit of background and motivation of why this problem is of interest and what led to the creation of this problem and what are the results that we got in this problem. And we'll discuss a little bit about the complexity of this problem, because I personally feel when we introduce a problem, it's better to know where the complexity lies for this problem, and then we'll give some future directions. And so that would be the flow for this talk. So basically, a graph is a tuple of vertices and edges where V is the set of vertices and E is the set of edges. And you can see all this
Dr.
G,
Swain,
A, yeah,
I'm sorry for the interruption. I think your screen is not visible. Do you want to try sharing it again?
no, sure. Sure, maybe I'll just cancel this one and then I'll start a new fresh one.
Sure.
Is it visible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so as you can see, there are three images that you can see in your screen, G, A, and B. So all these three are graphs. So graphs are basically mathematical entities, which consists of two sets, V and E, where V is the set of vertices. These points are basically the vertices, and then the line joining these two vertices are basically the edges. Okay. Now we define something which is a subgraph of a graph G is basically again a tuple V dash and E dash, where V dash is a subset of V and E dash is a subset of E. Now let's talk about what we call as an induced subgraph. So in this case, before going to the induced subgraph, both A and B are subsets of G, because you can see the vertex set is a subset of the vertex set of G, and the edge set is also a subset of the edge set of G. So a graph is called an induced subgraph of another graph if the vertex set is a subset of the original graph and the edge set is defined over the original edge set of the graph G. for instance, if you consider this graph, and if you consider these 4 points, these 4 vertices, which is basically these 4 vertices in G, then whatever edges that are present in G are also present in A. But that is not the case in B. For instance, we don't have this particular edge that is present in G, but that is not present in B. Therefore, A is an induced subgraph of G, but B is not. Okay, so that's a subtle difference between this induced subgraph and subgraphs. So basically, in an induced subgraph, for the same vertex set, all the edges that are present in the graph G should be present in the subgraph as well. So let's look at the motivation why somebody studies about these subgraphs. The advantage of studying subgraphs is that it helps in characterizing graphs. For instance, if you consider that a graph has no cycles, when I say a cycle, it means there exists a path that starts and ends with the same vertex. If there are no such cycles in a graph, then the graph is actually a forest. And similarly, if there are no odd cycles, when I say odd cycle, I mean it's a cycle with odd number of edges in it. Then you call this graph as a bipartite graph. So sometimes characterizing graphs becomes easy when you know certain properties which are basically defined over the subgraphs. So therefore, studies of subgraphs are always interesting, and they give a lot of insight about the original graph, about the original graph. Another such instance is when you are talking about planar graphs. One of the interesting properties of planar graphs is that if you remove, so if a graph is of n vertices and you remove order of square root n vertices from that graph, then it basically breaks the planar graph into 2 pieces, where each piece is consisting of 2n by 3 vertices. So if you want to visualize this thing, you can consider it as a grid, and then suppose it's an n cross n grid, and if you remove the the middle square root n vertices from that, the other 2 ends that would result after this removal would both be consisting of 2n by 2n on 3 vertices. It has also find applications in graph drawing, because graph drawing is something important in various fields. So one of the things is in the circuit layout, that you want to plot registers in such a way that there are very minimal overlapping in that. So the VLSI circuit designing. So there you can see some applications of the subgraphs. It also tells us the graph polynomials, for instance, the Tutt polynomial or the chromatic polynomial. So these are graph polynomials which reveals a lot of information about the graph. For instance, if you consider Tutt polynomial or a chromatic polynomial, the coefficient of each term basically gives you some specific information about graph. A chromatic polynomial is basically a polynomial that captures the graph coloring properties. So I'll not go details into the graph polynomials, because this is just an application of what we can achieve using these subgraphs. And then sometimes it is also useful to find some specific graphs which are purely of theoretical interest. So that those are some of the theoretical and practical applications of subgraphs. One of the more practical applications is network motifs, where we say, is there any pattern in the network which is appearing more frequently than the rest of the patterns? So those are some of the things that we'll see during the talk, which we can utilize as such. So therefore, it is important to do such a study. And let's see what is the study that we did out of this thing. So we define the frequency of an unleveled graph. So when I coin this term unleveled graph, it means we don't have levels on the vertices. Because if you consider it from an implementation point of view, and if I give levels on the vertices, suppose say consider this K3, where if I give this level. So K3 is not a good example as such because it's a complete graph. So every vertex is adjacent to every other vertex. If you consider a graph which is not complete, then changing the levels of the vertices actually changes the adjacency matrix. Therefore, it's difficult to recognize whether two graphs are the same, two graphs are isomorphic or not, because the changing the level changes their stance on the adjacency matrix. However, we consider all the unlabeled graphs, and we define the frequency of an unlabeled graph as follows. So it is basically the number of induced subgraphs of G that are isomorphic to a unlabeled graph H. What I mean by that? So consider this graph G, which is a K5. That means it's a complete graph on 5 vertices. A complete graph is a graph where you take any 2 vertices, there would be an edge joining them. So for instance, you take this graph, you take any 2 vertices in that graph, you would see that there are edges joining them. Now let's consider what are the induced subgraphs of this graph. So one of the induced subgraph of this graph is a single vertex, which is K1. That's a complete graph on one vertex. Another induced subgraph is K2, which is a single edge. That's a complete graph on 2 vertices. Another one is a K3, which is a complete graph on 3 vertices, which is basically K3. And another one is K4, which is a complete graph on 4 vertices. I think I missed out on K5 because the graph itself can also be an induced subgraph of the same graph. So, and you can see what is the occurrences or the frequency of each of these induced subgraphs inside this graph G. As you can see, the number of vertices in K5 is 5. So the frequency of K1 is 5. And the number of edges that is present inside this K5 is basically 5 choose 2. As you can see, you take any 2 vertices in this graph, there is an edge. So therefore, the number of ways to choose such a thing is 5 choose 2, which makes it 10. When we consider K3, that means we take any 3 vertices in this graph, you will see that because of the property of the connected of the complete graph, they will all also be adjacent to each other. All the vertices in that graph would be adjacent to each other. Therefore, selecting 3 vertices out of these 5 vertices is again 5 choose 3, which is 10. And the last thing in this thing is K4. That is, you take any 4 vertices, you will get a structure like this. And the number of such structures inside this graph is 5. The one that I missed out is K5. If I would have considered the entire graph, then the number of occurrences of that particular graph inside this graph would be 1. So now let's look at what is the most frequently connected induced subgraph. The most frequently connected induced subgraph of a graph G is basically a graph H such that the frequency of that graph H in G is maximum among all the unlabeled induced subgraphs of G. What does that mean? As we just discussed, these are the possible induced subgraph of this graph G. So we define something as the most frequently connected induced subgraph when the frequency of a particular induced subgraph is maximum among all the other induced subgraphs present inside that graph G. As you can see here, this induced subgraph K2 and K3, they have the maximum frequency in G among all the other graphs, among all the other induced subgraphs of this graph G. So the observation here is the most frequent connected induced subgraph, which we call as MIFSIS. So MIFSIS is something that is not unique. As you can see in this case, you can have more than one MIFSIS in a graph G. So what motivated us to this problem? We'll just go to that before this small example. So this is an example that basically an extension of the example that we saw, which is a K6. It's a complete graph on 6 vertices, and I took another graph which is a non-complete graph. And clearly, what is the MIFSIS of this graph and what is the MIFSIS of this graph? So because it's a complete graph on 6 vertices, and we have to find the induced subgraph which occurs the maximum number of times inside this graph. So we realized that you take any subset of vertices in this graph, that would be a complete graph. And because there are 6 vertices in that, we have to find a k such that 6 choose k is maximum. And by the properties of binomial theorem, we know that n choose k becomes maximum when k becomes floor of n on 2. Therefore, because we have 6 vertices here, so this structure becomes maximum because 6 choose 3 is 20, and that is the maximum that can happen when we choose k vertices from these 6 vertices. So in this case, we see that the frequency of this particular structure, this k3, is maximum in G1, and the frequency is 20. And in this case, so this is a path of length 4. So which is denoted by P4. That means there are 4 vertices in it, and they are joined by these edges. So in this graph, if you carefully count the number of P4s inside this graph G2, you would realize that actually outnumbers all the other induced subgraphs that are present inside G2. So this number turned out to be 9. So actually, what was the motivation behind doing this MIPSIS? So actually, during my PhD, what I was trying to do is I was trying to create one library kind of a thing where I would be able to compute all the not all the most of the graph parameters and store them in a database. So when I talk about graph parameters, it can be the chromatic number. That means the minimum number of colors that is required to color the graph in such a way that no 2 adjacent vertices should receive the same color. When I say adjacent vertices, that means there is a line joining those 2 vertices. So that is one example of a graph parameter. There are other parameters like that. For instance, the vertex connectivity, the edge connectivity, the tree width, and then we got the genus. So there are many such graph parameters. Some of those graph parameters are can be computed in polynomial time, and some of those parameters are hard to compute, which in computer science terms we call as NP-complete. So the challenge there was, how do you compute the graph parameters when they are NP-complete? I mean, you can always go for the exponential algorithm, which basically gives you the exact solution for that computing that particular parameter. But then what we observed is that some properties are quite recursive in nature. So therefore, what we tried to do is we tried to explore that recursive properties of those graph parameters, and then try to use we solved the smaller instances, and using the results of the smaller instances, we went to solve the larger instances. So that is something that that was basically started by Professor Graham Farr and Professor Paul Bonington, and then I basically continued and took it forward. So one of the questions that I asked at that point when I was working on this problem is, what is the trade-off? I mean, what is the point when you will go for some exact computation, and what is the point when you'll go for some recursive solutions? Because in one way, you are basically, the trade-off is you take the time complexity versus the amount of space that you are storing. So for that, we wanted to have a problem that is heavy, both in terms of computation and both in terms of lookups, because when I say lookups, that means both in terms of storage. So that leads to this problem of MIPSIS, because you can see that I have to store all the induced subgraphs and then count the frequency of all the induced subgraphs, which also involves the graph isomorphism checking in it. And then if I go for a brute force, so that's basically was heavy in computation. And similarly, we also found something which is heavy on lookups, so that we can do this trade-off. So the reason behind doing this trade-off is the number of connected unlabeled graphs, basically the size, the total number of such graphs increases exponentially, not exponentially, maybe super exponentially, as you can see with these numbers. With 7 vertices, you can basically, the total number of connected unlabeled graphs, these are all unique up to isomorphism, is only 853. And we expect that a normal desktop would have 4 gigabytes of memory, so it can easily fit into this kind of a thing. But with 8 vertices, it's still under control. With 9 vertices, still under control. With 10, it's still under control. But with 11, suddenly you would see that there are 10 billion graphs, which is still okay. But then the moment we jump from 11 to 12, we enter to the 100. Excuse me. We enter to the 164 billion number, and then with 13 we enter to the trillions. So, and that is practically impossible to keep it in the memory and then do computations over that. So this is the reason why we wanted to have something that would basically test and give us some evidence of which direction to choose from. So that basically lead to the creation of this problem MIPSIS. So let's see what are the results that we have so far on MIPSIS. So if it is a path, as I said, Pn is basically a path of length n. That means it's a path with n vertices. Then K1 is a MIPSIS of Pn. When I say K1, that means it's a complete graph on a single vertex. As you can see, the thing that I have marked in green is actually the MIPSIS of this thing. You consider all the other induced subgraphs of this graph G. So basically, the number of this K1 outnumbers everything else. Similarly, another interesting thing is that if you consider a cycle, for instance, this is a cycle that starts and ends with this vertex, suppose say n that I've marked green again. One good property of this cycle is that it is the only class of graphs among all the types of graphs possible in which you take any non-trivial subgraph of this cycle. When I say non-trivial subgraph, that means I'm not considering the empty subgraph and I'm not considering the entire graph itself. Then what happens is, what are the other induced subgraphs? It can be a single vertex, which is a K1. It can be a single edge. It can be a path of length 2. It can be a path of length 3. It can be a path of length 4. Irrespective of whatever you take up to length n minus 2, all those induced subgraphs has the same frequency. And this is the only class of graph that has that kind of a property, where you take any induced subgraph, it still has the same frequency as any other subgraph as any other induced subgraph of cycles. So some of the facts that we got in this process. So as I mentioned it before, that any induced subgraph of a complete graph is again a complete graph because of the induced property that you take any subgraph that is basically you choose any number of vertices from the complete graph because they are all pairwise adjacent. So that again results in a complete graph. And this is a typical application of binomial theorem, where we find this n choose k is maximum, where k is either floor or ceil of n on 2. So I considered floor of n on 2. So k n on 2 is always a MIPSIS of kn. And this is an interesting lemma where the goal is to find the MIPSIS of a complete bipartite graph. So I hope some of you might be knowing about bipartite graphs. If not, then I'll just quickly define what's a bipartite graph. A bipartite graph is a graph where we can partition the vertex set into two disjoint sets. And every edge in that graph basically joins a vertex from two different partitions. In other words, you cannot have an edge inside the same partition. Okay, so if that is the structure, and the question is, And if it's a complete bipartite graph, what I mean by complete here, that means every vertex in each partition is adjacent to every other vertex in the other partition. Then it's a complete bipartite graph. So the question that is, what can be a MFSIS of a complete bipartite graph KMN, where M and N are the sizes of the partitions respectively. So the lemma says it is another complete bipartite graph such that it would maximize this particular value, M choose A, N choose B, plus M choose B, and N choose A. And here I wanted to highlight one point, that we could prove this much, but then although it looks very, this expression looks very simple, but then finding out A and B such that, this condition is met is actually hard. I mean, I couldn't solve it yet. That can we find some A and B that satisfies this property such that this value is maximum among all the A and B, which is less than equals to M and N. So that is still open. I mean, we couldn't find anything anywhere where we can address this problem. So one of the main results of this problem is that we proved that finding MFSIS of a graph is SARP hard. So maybe before that, I'll give a little bit of outline of what is SARP hard. So I expect that you guys are familiar with NP complete and NP hard problems. So in an NP complete problem, the type of questions that we normally ask are decision version problems. For instance, we are given a graph, and then the chromatic number problem that I defined at the beginning of my talk, where we are supposed to find the minimum number of colors. So the decision version problem for that particular chromatic number thing is, if I give you an input, a graph G and a number K, and the question that I ask you is, does there exist a K coloring of this graph G? What does that mean? That means, can I color the graph with K colors such that no two adjacent vertices gets the same color? So the output of that question would be a yes or no. So this is basically a decision version problem, and this is also an NP complete problem. So when I'll just briefly give the intuition of NP completeness before jumping into the SARP class. So the intuition behind this is, if I present you any certificate, that means if I present you an instance of a solution, that one should be able to verify it in polynomial time. So that is clear that for the chromatic number, if I give a mapping where each vertex gets a color, then one can verify it whether two adjacent vertices are getting the same color or not, and then if the number of colors are K or not. So that can be checked in polynomial time, hence that belongs to NP. And to show the NP hardness, what we have to do is we have to take an existing known problem which is known to be NP complete, and then we do a polynomial time reduction to this problem, and then we saw that okay, because this every yes instances of the known NP complete problem maps to this new problem that we are saying, and every no instance also maps to the no problem. So to the no instances, that means if you can solve my problem, then I can also solve the existing problem. So therefore, this is how we establish the NP completeness. The interesting thing that comes out here is in the SARP class, which is also known as the counting class or the enumerative class of problems, where the question we ask is a bit different. There we ask, does there exist a K coloring of a graph? Here we ask, how many K colorings are there in a graph? So here the question emphasizes on the quantification. For instance, we ask like, how many dominating sets are there of certain size? So the question is always asked as how many. I mean, it's an intuitive way of looking at this problem. That's why this problem is a little bit interesting as well, because here is one problem where we are asking, can you find something in that? Which is in a sense loosely, the answer would be yes or no. But still, this problem is belonging to this number P class. So let's see what happens in this case, and how we are going to do this. So to do this thing, what I'll do is I take an existing problem, which is basically a number k click problem. That means given a, I'll first define what's a click. A click in a graph G is basically you take a subset of the vertices of the graph G, and if you check that you take any two vertices in that subgraph, in that subset, if there is an edge joining them, that means all those vertices are pairwise adjacent, then that is a click in that graph G. When I say a k click, that means you take any, so there exists some k vertices in that graph G such that they form a click. So that's what we call as a k click. And it is already established that the number of, to count whether there are, how many k clicks are there inside a graph, that is known to be already, that is already known to be Sarpi hard. So to do this problem, what I did is I initially do a reduction from the number k click problem to number n on 2 click. That means given a graph G, how many graph G of order n? When I say order n, that means the number of vertices is n. So the question is how many n on 2 clicks are present inside that graph. So we first saw that that problem is a SARP P complete problem, and then using that particular problem, what we did is we did a reduction to the MEFSIS problem. So this part I'm going to show that how did I do the reduction from this number n on 2 click problem to this MEFSIS problem. So what are the tools that I need? So normally what happens in a NP completeness proof is you do a polynomial time reduction, but here what you do is you do a Turing reduction. So for a Turing reduction, what you need is an oracle. So what is an oracle? You can consider that an oracle is kind of a virtual abstract machine which can solve anything in order of one time or in constant time, you can say. It can also solve the the halting problem and the incomputable problems, all those problems it can solve in the undecidable problems, all these things it can solve in constant time. So that's an oracle. So here the oracle that the setup of the proof would go something like this. Just to remind you guys what we are trying to do here, we're trying to do a reduction from number n on 2 click to the MEFSIS problem. So what we're going to do in this case is we'll consider an oracle that can solve this MEFSIS problem, and we'll serve our offerings to the oracle. What I mean by that, that means we'll try to gather as much information as we can get from the oracle by asking it difficult questions about the MEFSIS. And then we are only allowed to ask polynomial number of questions. When I say polynomial, that means it is in terms of the size of the input. In our case, it's n, the order of the graph. So we keep on asking that kind of a question to this oracle. And from that, whatever answers we get, using those answers, we should be able to tell how many n on 2 clicks are there inside the graph. Okay, is the setup clear? That we are going to ask about MEFSIS, but from that answer, we are going to derive what is the number of n on 2 clicks are there. So therefore, the first thing that is needed is an oracle. So suppose say there is an oracle that takes a graph G and that gives us the MEFSIS of this graph G. And then what I need is a polynomial time algorithm that takes the graph as an input and outputs the total number of k n on 2 clicks using this oracle M. Okay, so this name of the oracle is suppose say M. So to do this, one of the biggest challenges that I face to do this is how shall we think of counting the occurrences of some particular induced subgraph? Because when we give our offerings to the oracle, we are trying to gather as much information as we want. But normally what happens in case of a reduction problem is we add a new vertex to the existing graph, or we do introduce some parallel edges into a graph, or we do some edge subdivision. We do all these kind of operations to to do this reductions. But the nature of this problem is like this, that I cannot actually play with the structure of the graph, because the moment I change the structure of the graph, the frequency count of the induced subgraphs would change, and that would not help the cause because I want to count them in a more precise manner. So therefore, the thing that we introduced are loopy clicks. What is a loopy click? A loopy click is actually a click with a difference where every vertex has a self loop in it. And why did I do such a thing? The advantage of such a thing is because I am considering only simple graphs. So simple graphs cannot have this kind of loopy clicks in them. So if I add this extra loopy click things into an existing graph, it is not going to change the count of anything else inside that graph because I'm considering induced subgraphs. So the moment I pick, suppose say this particular edge, I have to also pick this loopy clicks along it. Therefore, the count of all the induced subgraphs inside this graph G would remain same, but still I'll be able to extract some information. So let's characterize how this oracle is going to behave when it gets this kind of an input. So the way oracle going to behave is, if there are multiple MIPSes of a graph G, as we have seen in the case of K5, we have K2 and K3, which are two different MIPSes. So it is going to output the largest click. What is it? What do you mean by that? What I mean by that is, if it has to choose between K2 and K3, it is always going to bias towards K3. Okay. And if it has to choose between two non-complete graphs, suppose say it has to choose between P2 and P3, then it would bias towards P3 because it is of higher order. So with this setup, let's try to see how can we find out the number of, suppose say if, so how can we find out the number of n on 2 clicks in a graph G? So let's take an example and then try to find this answer. So suppose say this is the graph. If you remember, this is the graph where P4 was a MIFCUS for this graph, and the frequency of this P4 inside this graph is 9. And how many vertices in this? How many vertices are there in this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And our goal is, using this MIFSIS information, how can we tell how many triangles are there inside this? Because there are 6 vertices in it. So n on 2 would be 6 on 2, which is 3. So we have to find out how many triangles are there in this. So the thing that we are going to do is, so the one that is in red is the major step that we are going to do. So I'll just walk you through the algorithm, and then we'll take an example and go through it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, I first check whether it's a complete graph. If it's a complete graph, then I have nothing to do in this case because n choose k would be the frequency of any k order induced subgraph of that complete graph. So the frequency would be n. Basically, here we are trying to find out how many n on 2 clicks are there. So the answer would be n choose n on 2, and that would be a straightforward case. If that is not the case, what I am going to do is, I am going to add loopy clicks. I'm going to perform a disjoint sum of loopy click complete graphs. I'm going to perform an disjoint sum of loopy clicks with the original graph, and I keep increasing the order of the loopy clicks till the frequency of the loopy click outnumbers the frequency of the MIFCUS in the original graph. So with that, what information that I'm going to get? With this, the information that I'm going to get is, I'll get to know an upper bound or an estimate of what is the frequency of the MIFCUS. And that is the information that I need. That first I would use the frequency. Once I compute the frequency precisely, then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use that frequency information to compute the number of n on 2 clicks. So the first thing that I did here is, because I know that the frequency of the MIFCUS in this graph is 9, because we have seen that in the initial slides. So first what I did is, I added a loopy click. The moment I added a loopy click, what is the MIFCUS of this graph? So the frequency of a loopy click in this case would be 1, so it's nothing changes. So the frequency still remains, the MIFCUS still remains the P4. Then I increased the size of the loopy click. Here I was adding a K1 loopy click. Now I am adding a K2 loopy click. Still nothing changes because the frequency of P4 is still outnumbering the frequency of any induced subgraph of this graph. So therefore, this is not the case. Then I increase the order to K3 loopy click. Again, every induced subgraph of this K3 loopy click has a frequency which is less than the frequency of this particular graph. So that also didn't help the cause. Then we go for this K4 loopy click. And in K4 loopy click, as you can see, the frequency of this particular edge is basically 4 choose 2, which is 6. But still that doesn't help the thing. And then we come to this part. When we have K5 loopy click and this graph, as we have seen before, the only thing that has changed is we have got loops around the vertices. Apart from that, everything remains the same. So the frequency of K2 in this case is actually outnumbering the frequency. K2 loopy click of this graph is actually outnumbering the frequency of the MIFCUS in this graph, because the MIFCUS frequency of this particular graph is 9, and the frequency of this K2 loopy click in this graph is 10. Therefore, this outnumbers the frequency of this particular part. So what we are going to do is we are going to add this particular graph to this graph. So now we know that the frequency of the MIFSIS of this particular graph is going to be something which is less than equals to 10, because this number we know. That's why we are intentionally adding these loopy clicks, because we know the frequency of each of the induced subgraphs of this particular graph. Okay, so now we know that the frequency is less than equals to some bound. So our goal now is to make sure that we have to count it exactly. We got an upper bound. Now we are going to try to find out that can we get it exactly the exact number of the frequency. So what I'm going to do is, although I found that K5 loopy click outnumbers this thing, I am not going to add a K5 loopy click. Instead, I'm going to add a K4 loopy click. Okay, because by doing so, I know that I am getting a frequency count of 6. And I know that 6 is something less than the frequency of MIFCUS, and 10 is something which is an upper bound of the MIFCUS. So somehow I have to, I have to cover up this gap of 7, 8, 9, and I have to unambiguously tell that 9 is the frequency. So what I do now is I again start the same process. So when I keep repeating the same process, I first added a K1 loopy click. That didn't help the cause. K2 loopy click didn't help the cause. K3 didn't help. Here, when I add a K4 loopy click, I knew that the frequency of this K2 loopy click here is 6, and here again it is 6. So it is 6 plus 6 is 12, which is clearly greater than 9. Therefore, this is a candidate that can be added to this thing. So again, I'm not going to add a K4 loopy click. Instead, I'm going to add a K3 loopy click. So now you can see this thing that the frequency of this K2 loopy click is 6 in this graph, is 3 in this graph. So that is basically 6 plus 3 is 9. And in this graph, it is 9. But as we have discussed, it is always going to err towards the simple graph. So therefore, we get it as P4 instead of K2 loopy click. So again, I started the same process. I added a K1 loopy click, didn't help. But when I added a K2 loopy click, it worked. That means what? With 9, I knew that here the frequency is 9, but that didn't help. But when I added extra one more, suddenly this became the MIFCUS. That means whatever is the frequency that I get here, the frequency of the MIFCUS is just one less, right? Because the only thing that I added here is one more K2 loopy click, and suddenly that makes it the K2 loopy click as the MIFCUS. So from this, I know that what I have added is a K4 loopy click and a K2 loopy click and another K2 loopy click. And that turned out to be, in this case, that turned out to be 9, because although we have a K2 loopy click, we are not going to add a K2 loopy click. We are going to add a K1 loopy click, as we have discussed before. And then the MIFCUS in that particular setup is basically a K1 loopy click, and the count of K1 loopy clicks inside this graph is basically 4 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1, and that basically gives us 9. Now the second challenge is, once we know the frequency of the MIFCUS, how shall we find out the total number of n on 2 clicks? So that is quite straightforward. So what I did here is I kept on adding loopy clicks of higher size. So again, if it's a complete graph, then I will just return the n on 2 click. Otherwise, I'm going on adding the I'm going on adding some complete graph into it till this outnumbers the frequency of the MIFCUS. So here, when I added this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when I added this case 6, so basically what happened here is, what is the total number of triangles in case 6 is 20, right? And I don't know how many K3s are there in this case. But what I know is, if I give these two graphs as a single graph to the previous algorithm, I can find out the frequency of the MIFCUS. Because in this graph, the frequency of the MIFCUS, which is the triangle, is 22. That is something that I can figure out from the previous algorithm. And I know how many triangles are there inside this graph. So subtracting the total number of triangles that is there inside this graph from the total that we get from these two graphs basically gives us the frequency of the total number of n on 2 clicks. So therefore, we find out the total number of n on 2 clicks inside the graph G using MIFSIS as the oracle, and that's exactly what we wanted. Therefore, because the number n on 2 click problem is already known to be SAR-P hard, and we did a reduction from using from MIFSIS from the number n on 2 click to MIFSIS. Therefore, MIFSIS problem is also SAR-P hard. And it is not difficult to see that both these algorithms runs in polynomial time. So that establishes the claim. So then one question that arose is, can every graph be a MIFSIS? The question is, we have found out that K1 can be a MIFSIS of K2, and K2 can be a MIFSIS of K4. K3 can be a MIFSIS of K6. So the next larger graph is C4. So the question is, can C4 be a MIFSIS of any other graph? And surprisingly, the answer is no. And I'll not go to the gory details of the proof of this particular thing. And then what we figured out is that not only C4, but also any cycle whose length is greater than equals to 4 will not be a MIFSIS of any other graph. So this is some of the computational results that we got, that we computed all the MIFSIS of all non-click graphs up to 12 vertices. And what we have observed is that for all the non-click graphs, the MIFSIS is always going to be one among these 4 graphs. Either it's a K2, or it's a P3, or it's a K3, or it's a P4. So the question that came from this observation is that, can we construct a graph, or does there exist a family of graphs where the MIFSIS is, the size of the MIFSIS is as large as the graph? So the question that we raised is, what is the maximum number of vertices the MIFSIS of a graph can contain? And well, the answers are pretty nice. If you consider this perfect binary tree, the MIFSIS of this perfect binary tree is actually captures the 60%, almost 60% of the vertices of this entire graph. So let's see what I meant by that. One thing that we observed is that because normally when we consider a perfect binary tree, and if you look at it, I mean, what is the most commonly occurring structure inside this? You might consider that either it's an edge or it's a path, because that looks, at least to the naked eye, that looks at, oh, that is the pattern that appears the most inside this graph, but that is not the case. So one of our results states that it can never be a path. So the paths are always outnumbered by that. And then another lemma that we have is that says if a perfect binary tree is of height n, and if S is a subset of subgraph of Tn minus 1, then the frequency of S is it's basically saying this. It's saying that whatever is the MIPSIS of this particular subgraph, you take only one child of this. How many ways does that appear inside this graph? Either it can be a left child, or it can be a right child, or it can be a child. The same pattern can appear if you start from this parent, from this root, and then you go up to everything one less. I mean up to level n minus 1. These three structures are isomorphic. So whatever is the MIPSIS of this thing, that is going to be at least 3 times appearing inside this bigger structure. So that's what it says when it says that the frequency of this particular subgraph is going to be at least thrice the frequency of that induced subgraph. And we also observe that the MIPSIS of a perfect binary tree cannot be contained in any of its subtrees, either the left subtree or the right subtree or the upper subtree that we just saw. It cannot it is not contained inside that. That means the structure is at least as big as more than any of these subtrees. So some other results that we have here is, so these are basically the MIPSIS of T3, and we figured out that the frequency of such things is basically 2 to the power 5, and this is just T3. And then we found a recursive definition or a recursive construction for computing the MIPSIS of this Tn. So basically, this is the recursive formula for recursive construction for finding the MIPSIS. So basically, the construction goes like this. You take any 2 copies of this thing, and then you join it through another vertex. That basically gives the MIPSIS of the next order. That means if I choose this A and B and I take another vertex here, and then I give an edge to this particular vertex and this particular vertex, then that would become the MIPSIS of T4. And how many such choices are there? Because there are 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 such vertices and 6 such graphs, and then we just need 2 of them to be combined. So 6 choose 2 gives us 15. So we got 15 such choices for finding a MIPSIS of T4. Similarly, we have to choose 2 from 15. So that basically gives us a infinite class of graphs that we can construct for each of these Tn. And that's basically about this part. And again, we did a little bit of digression from our work where we found out what is the most frequent connected induced path. So the definitions remains the same. Only thing is that we are only considering the paths now. So in case of a Tn, it is basically going to be Ptn minus 2. So that is some of the things that we have already done. Some of the things that we are trying to do at present is what can we say about the uniqueness of the MIPSIS? I mean, what is the characterization under which we can say that given a graph G, the MIPSIS is going to be unique or it's going to be multiple in number? Another extension of this work is considering a MIPSIS of size k. So of order k. What I mean by that is instead of finding out the MIPSIS among all the induced subgraphs, let's restrict it over some number k. So for instance, if this is the graph, then the MIPSIS 1 would be only this thing. MIPSIS 2 in this case would be only an edge. MIPSIS 3, when I talk about MIPSIS 3, see, we got choices here. Either I can go for 1, 2, 3 like this, which is a P3, or I can go for 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 like this. And clearly the P3 outnumbers the triangles here. Therefore, MIPSIS 3 is 3. Similarly, MIPSIS 4 in this case is going to be a P4 because the other 4 vertex induced subgraph is a C4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is a C4. So, and then the question that arises is, will this make the computation little easier, little difficult? And so that is a question that is left open. And because I'm also passing this parameter k, so this might be a parameterized approach for solving this problem, because so far whatever algorithms that we have, that is basically super exponential in time. So can this k be used as a signature for the graph? I mean, something like you create these pairs, and using those pairs, so these pairs are basically a MIFCUS k and its frequency. So if I give you MIFSIS1 and whatever is the graph, MIFSIS2 and whatever is the graph, MIFSIS3 and whatever is the graph, if I list it up to n, can it uniquely identify the graph? So that's a question that we raise. Um, and then can several similar networks can have some similar MIFSIS? That we don't know. Again, another, because this is pretty much similar to the network motifs problem. So the question that we ask is there any relationship between these two in a, not in a very usual manner, but can there be one such possibility? So what we did so far, and what we are suggesting now is, can we answer these questions? Whether can we find a p-space algorithm for MIPSIS? Can we characterize graphs that can be MIPSIS? Can we characterize graphs that can be a k-MIPSIS? And can we find some application of MIPSIS in networks? So in a nutshell, what we did is we introduced this problem called as MIPSIS, and then we proved that finding MIPSIS is RP hard. We discussed the MIPSIS on some special classes of graphs. For instance, the complete graph, the complete bipartite graph, cycles, and perfect binary trees. We presented an infinite class of graphs whose MIPSIS is large. That contains at least 60% of the graph. And we presented some future work in this area. So that concludes the talk. Any questions?
Thank you for the
Sorry,
talk, Dr. Swain. Can you hear me?
Thanks, Aditya. Yes, I can.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So I was actually thinking about, by the way, this is very interesting. Clearly, it's a complex problem. But I was wondering about the possible real world implications of MAPSIS in the graph. So for example, does it tell us something about, let's say, a complex network representing social connections between billions of peoples? Is there any information we can get from this? Or maybe is there an application of this in, let's say, circuit design for VLSI circuits, for instance, or anything else?
Okay, actually, it's an interesting question. And Kerry Morgan, one of my collaborators in this problem, she's actually finding out the MIPSIS of a brain network. Basically, you take all the neurons inside the brain, and that basically forms a very complex network. And she's trying to figure out how, can we find out which portion, what is the commonly occurring structure inside the brain that basically dictate the terms. And for that, they're trying to find an application using this MIPSIS concept.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions? So maybe while the other participants are thinking about the question, I can maybe ask one more quick question. So that was about, that was one of the steps in the proof. I probably missed an explanation, but I didn't want to interrupt the talk. So
Yeah, sure.
on slide 16, I think it was on slide 16, where you were feeding to the oracle, you're feeding these loopy cliques to estimate the size of the MAPSIS. So I guess I missed why were you only able to come up with the upper bound, and why, for example, it was not let's say the exact size in that initial step?
Right. The reason behind that is the way the Oracle is treating. The Oracle is going to always err towards the simple graph over the multi-graph. So, till this point, if the frequency of the simple graph and the multi-graph are the same, then the Oracle is gonna if the frequency of the MIPS is in a multi-graph. When I say multi-graph, that means graph that has loops in it, and a simple graph is a graph where there is no loops in it. Then the Oracle is going to always return me the answer which is towards the simple graph. But then, so if both of them has suppose say frequency 9, then it would have given me the simple graph. So I have no way to know that whether these numbers are same or this number is bigger. But when I add this extra thing, then what I get is a loopy click. But then by that time, the frequency of this loopy click is higher than the frequency of the MEPSIS of the simple graph that is the input. So therefore, at this point, I only know that the frequency of this MEPSIS of this loopy click in this graph is actually higher than the frequency of this graph, or maybe equal. But I don't know for sure whether it's equal or it's higher. Therefore, I said it's an upper bound.
I see. Thank you for going over it again. All right, so I believe this is it for now. Thank you very much for the talk, Dr. Swain. Once again, we are very much appreciative that you took the time despite the significant difference in the time zones. It has been a pleasure having you here